Okay, I'm Bob Hutmacher, University of California Extension cotton specialist, and also working in some other agronomic crops as well, and in some irrigation management studies in a number of different crops. What I wanted to cover today is a little bit of information, I guess, about variety trials, is sort of what the request was for me to cover. I hesitate to say that I can also add a little bit about some of the screening information that we have on Fusarium race 4, if there is a desire, because it certainly is one of the things that impacts some of the choices on things like variety trials. All of our variety trials, it's really changed tremendously over, at least in my experience, over about the last 15 years or so in terms of what we did. We used to have an extension specialist basically dedicated to running the San Joaquin Valley Cotton Board programs. That all ended about 6 years ago. The farm advisors and myself pretty much have been taken over on most of the variety trial work since that time, and also the San Joaquin Valley Cotton Board program variety trials are greatly simplified compared to what they used to be. I had to get a crash course about 6 years ago in learning how to do I think it was about 170 different fiber quality analyses that were done by 4 different vendors plus the USDA HVI classing office that were part of the old version of the San Joaquin Valley Cotton Board program. We went in about a 2-year period starting about 4 years ago. We whittled that down to where now basically our fiber quality data is the same as what you all are going to get HVI classing data from the Bicellia lab. So again, lots of changes. It still is one of these things that requires quite a few different people to help. The farm advisors in the different counties are involved. Up here in the North Valley, since Ron Vargas retired, Bill Weir has been helping us at locations in the north end of the valley, so we really appreciate that. We still have for a while maybe, the research gen down at the Shafter Research and Extension Center. We, like Pete, get funding from quite a few different folks for both the Pima and the Acela part of our work. Cotton Incorporated, San Joaquin Valley Cotton Board, Supima, and California Cotton Alliance, and others. So again, we appreciate that. That's the reason why we can do this, along with support from the seed companies. I wanted to mention a few things, at least my perspective about what's going on with variety testing. Again, we've dealt with a lot of changes in variety evaluations through the years from when we were dominant Acela. Then there was an interest for a brief period in the late 1990s in very rapid introduction of non-Acela uplands, which we're still working with in a number of locations. Introduction of Pimas started in the late 80s and early 90s. And then the interest in non-Acela uplands has expanded. Introduction of transgenics certainly is something that's expanded both in the uplands and in the Acelas. Again, 5 years ago we added the cotton board trials. Big changes in dominant varieties, and either the perception or the reality that continued improvements in fiber quality improvement haven't always resulted in price improvements, particularly in Pima. So again, it's my take on part of the reason why the emphasis on the kind of continued incremental improvements in fiber quality really, the push isn't there like it was in years past. To me, my perspective is the industry is certainly concerned about availability of new germplasm for yield improvements, for quality to, I'd say, a lesser extent. Certainly a lot more interest in disease resistance, particularly related to Fusarium race 4. Again, as well as retention of harvesting and ginning infrastructure during these years when we have some of the volatility in acreage. What we've tried to do with the university in order to at least make information basically available is we have a website. This one's shown on the bottom here, this cottoninfo.ucdavis.edu. I apologize in advance if you had a little frustration trying to get something off of that the last couple of months. I think we have things back up and running. We had to make some changes, again, because we don't have some of the support through the university that we had, at least to do it the same way as we had in prior years. We try to put multi-year data on things like fiber quality as well as yield, gin turnout, lint percentage, seed cotton yields, so that you can take a look at multiple years worth of data. And I'd make the same kind of comment, I guess, that all the seed companies may or may not make this comment. I think it's really important to look at multiple years data multiple locations when you're trying to kind of make some generalizations about what you might want to be interested in. We do have prior years where we had approved Acala trials. We still have approved HEMA trials. We have something at both of the research center sites, Westside and Shafter. We may just try to continue this at Westside. California Upland Advanced Strains trials for entries that we get from the seed companies that for upland, non-Acala upland varieties they're interested in growing here. Hopefully, I think a lot of them are wanting those to be some of the upland varieties that you consider for production in the San Joaquin Valley, but they're also some of the ones that they're bringing in here for seed production. And again, this data is available on the website. One of the things with our changes and what's going on at Shafter and everything, we're running the gin as fast as we can to stay ahead of them closing us down at Shafter.
The group may not know what's
okay.
going on.
Well, I'll tell you, basically the Shafter station, it's been in operation since 1922 as a USDA station for about the first 70 years. Then it was transferred to the University of California. We ran it for about 17, 18 years through budget cuts of the university. Then it was basically the university terminated their arrangement for running the center about a year and a half ago. USDA ARS took it over, and now as of about 2 weeks ago, officially, it's being closed. So people like me that are located there and who have equipment there and lab and people and our research gin is located there, we're kind of in a holding pattern trying to see kind of what comes next. Property's owned by the county. They may or may not be interested in letting a few of us hang around, but again, I think it's days as a research center with research trials being done there and everything else certainly don't look real promising for the next for the near future as well as maybe the longer term future as well. So we're kind of in a holding pattern on that. Anyway, so we're ginning as fast as we can. I think one of the things I may do this year is go ahead and put the seed cotton yield data that we have. I'll present a little bit of it here today, but I think rather than wait until we have the lint yield numbers and the gin turnout numbers and everything, we may go ahead and put the seed cotton yield data up for you along with the prior year's gin turnout numbers, just so you can kind of do some of your own calculations if you'd like. And again, all the prior year data is also available. What I wanted to do is just kind of mention a few of the types of things that are out there in terms of the kind of trials that we've done, and then show you some of the yield numbers. This is seed cotton yield data in the Acala upland variety trials that we have. This is just two of the locations I'm showing right here. And again, you can take a look at what we've done in these Acala upland trials. Again, we don't have entries currently in the approved Acala program. So what we did was talk to seed companies about varieties that they may actually be interested in growing here in California, attempting to narrow in on some of the higher quality ones that would be at least close to the Acala markets. And again, so here you can see seed cotton yields. They really worked out quite well at both of these locations. Mendota location here locally, and Joaquina in the Tulare County area, and you can see that some of these old workhorses like Phytogen 72 actually is still really a hard one to compete against and beat. It still does really well, and you'll see in some of the other data that Phytogen 72 is hanging in there actually really well. It's a high quality in terms of fiber quality, but also a good yield performer. 725, which is our dominant planted Acala variety, actually also did very well in quite a few different locations in recent years. It's been fairly close to a match to Phytogen 72 at some, but not all locations. And again, some locations, Daytona RF, which is still being supported by Bayer, hangs in there pretty well. All these FM varieties are FiberMax varieties. If you remember about 10, 15 years ago, FiberMax brought a lot of materials in here, and they were kind of close in terms of fiber quality, but just not quite there. And they keep notching up in terms of improvements in fiber quality. If you look at some of these newer ones in the FiberMax, in terms of fiber quality, they're close to, say, like a Maxa type of quality, not quite up in length and strength maybe with Phytogen 72, but again, they're getting closer that this may be part of the future of what kind of upland varieties you may be working with, again, because for about 3 years running now in the cotton board program, we haven't had any entries in the approved Acala testing program. So this may be part of what some of the stuff that you're going to get. Okay, Joaquina, this is Shafter and Westside. Shafter this year was heavy ligas pressure, like in a lot of locations down in Kern County. You can see what kind of things we were up against. Westside, again, we had quite a bit of ligas in the early part of the season, but again, we really benefited from being able to really get the top crop nailed down at the west side. But again, you can see in this year's data, pretty hard to beat Phytogen 72 with most of these other materials here, and among the transgenics that are available, again, the Phytogen 725, real good fiber quality, hangs in there really very comparably with all, or even a bit better than some of the FM varieties or Daytona. And again, I recommend that if you can, go back through some of the other previous years worth of data that are on the website. This is just some numbers that I pulled off from 2009 Acala Upland Variety Trials. Some of the same entries, and Phytogen 755 WRF, which is of interest to some people as an alternative as a transgenic, is still available, and this is one of the entries that was included in those particular trials and held up reasonably well at these locations versus 72, 725, and Daytona. We've seen this kind of thing with Daytona, more volatility as a variety, really great, sometimes tops the trial locations in some locations, and then doesn't hang in there as well at some other locations. So that would be my take as to why you ought to take a look at multiple years worth of data as well as locations. This is going back a little bit further. Again, you can look at any of these on the website. It shows some of these same varieties, 755, WRF, Daytona, 725, 72, a range of locations. Again, in the 2008 year, a little bit different conditions. You can see Daytona looked very good this particular year at the Joaquina location, and kind of comparable at most of the other locations. Okay, one of the other types of data that's available, and again, I'd recommend this as sort of a first take type of thing if you're considering a much broader range of materials. We have a thing that we've run for quite a few years called an advanced strains upland testing. And I won't make any of the same claims that as you go across this group here, a lot of times what you might see is ones that might be of interest in terms of yield performance. But what this is a broad cross-section of materials from all kinds of different seed companies across the United States. So some of them, they'd like to grow it here in California. Some of them, again, they're growing them for seed. Some of them, they'd just like to see how the thing would perform in our kind of climate and our conditions. Okay, so again, that'd be another one you can take a look at. The way we have this posted on the website is we always have the fiber quality data, the HBI quality data is there along with the yield data. So you see obviously a yield number that's of interest to you, the next thing to do is going to be to take a look and see what kind of fiber quality. And I will say that compared to when we were doing this, 6, 7, 8 years ago on these upland advanced strains tests, the average fiber quality is greatly improved on the materials that we're seeing, coming from the seed company. So much, much better. Used to be that you'd find all kinds of ones that would be like some of the Stoneville varieties that would just perform beautifully out here, or Suregrove varieties would look great. And then when you look at the strength numbers, I mean, they'd be 28s and 29s and things that would really represent a really huge discount. And that's changed at least to some extent. And again, you can see not a lot of them that say at a location like 2010 at Westside, not a lot of them beat Phytogen 72, certainly, which would have a fiber quality advantage over quite a few of the entries in here, but there are definitely a few of them here that represent some significant yield improvements, again, at this location. Again, really dramatic some years, less dramatic some other years. Again, it's all on the website. And again, this is basically just a reminder, like I said, you can go across these kind of materials, and compared to Phytogen 72, I just did kind of a cross-section of ones that are some of the newer experimentals. And you can see some length numbers that actually look quite good and comparable to Phytogen 72 shown here in this kind of purple color. Strength numbers, a lot more variability still in the strength numbers, but again, quite a few different entries that are, you know, at least notching their way up toward coming closer to the Acala numbers. So again, makes your life more complicated in that there are a lot of choices, but again, I do think that there are going to be some options for some other materials to look at if the seed companies aren't putting as much emphasis on developing new strains. And again, this is some of the same type of data you can see in some prior years. Can be a lot more dramatic. This is Shafter and Westside data on a low lint yield year or a moderate to low lint yield year, and you can see quite a few of them were outperformed Phytogen 72, you know, in this particular year in 2008. Okay, wanted to go on to the PIMA data, and again, this stuff is being redundant here, but this is also on the website. And what I'm showing here is cotton board trial locations, and I have it grouped into a 5-site average versus a 3-site average here, and I'll explain that in a minute. These are lint yields for entries in the San Joaquin Valley cotton board trials at that time. DP or OA 360, again, which is of some interest as a Fusarium race 4 resistant variety. 8212 RF, just for, so if you don't know what they were first entered as, 802 RF, again, which is another highly resistant, race 4 resistant entry, is the same, 8212 is the same as Phytogen 802 RF in the early testing. 8213 shown here is the same as Phytogen 805 RF, which is kind of intermediate in race 4 Fusarium resistance. 800 is kind of our standard still in terms of race 4 resistance. Phytogen 830 is a good yield performer and a little earlier in terms of maturity, but highly susceptible, I would say, to race 4 Fusarium. Cobalt from Bayer is still being produced and available, at least as of this 2011 year. Again, but susceptible to race 4 Fusarium, and you can see again a 3-site average here. We had HA195. Okay, and then what I did is break it down here. This is again data from 2009. I'll show the later data here in just a minute. And this is looking at Shafter, Corcoran, and Lamore numbers. Again, you can see Shafter, some problems in terms of yield performance, much lower average yields here. But again, you can see, you know, some similarity in kind of the relative ranking of these different varieties. And I would say that, again, one of the things that you have to look at, the reason why looking at multiple years worth of data is I think the more grower experience there is at grower field sites with some of these varieties that are the newer ones like the 802 RF, generally what we see is these yields improving as people get used to a little more about how you should consider managing those. And this is Mendota and Los Banos locations, again, with these same entries as the prior trial. So you can see, again, the more resistant varieties in terms of race 4 Fusarium, the DP or OA 360, the 8212, which is 802 RF from Phytogen, and 800 right here. And again, HA195, similar to what we've seen quite a few years in the past, can really be a very, very good performer as long as the growing season lasts long enough and you can kind of get everything matured out that's there on the plants. And I won't get into a separate argument with you as to how you like running a HA195 through your picker. I mean, we have growers, particularly in Tulare County, who when we line them up for variety trials, they tell us, we'll take these, but we won't grow that. And a few of them have just had enough problems with their harvesting equipment with HA195 because of the size of the plant and everything that, you know, in their experience, they don't want to mess with it. So again, we continue to try to keep a mix of things in these variety trials when we put the information out there, just because if, you know, my take on it would be if this was consistently, you know, 50 pounds more or 100 pounds more, we'd probably say, well, you know, we've had it in the trial long enough, but there's a fairly long history of having some of these materials, HA195 and more recently HA222, that actually have been real good yield performers. So again, we're just trying to provide the information while we're out there. This is the 2010 data. Again, you can see now that it's approved 802 RF and 805 RF, or have that official name now. And you can see, in terms of relative yield performance, kind of how they stack up. There definitely are some, I would say that one like 802 RF is not a slam dunk, easy to manage variety. It'd be great if it was, since it's quite disease resistance in terms of race 4 fusarium. OA360, similar, quite a bit of variability in the yield data that we see across years with that variety. But again, these I would expect to be of interest because of the race 4 fusarium resistance, along with Phytogen 800. This is the Huron and Mendota locations, same entries for 2010. Again, you can see these kind of numbers, and again, all this is on the website as well. This is the 2011 data. And I'll just draw your attention. What we tried to do here, again, we're still including some of the newer experimental materials. We try to keep the ones that we think are of key interest based on acreage, like 802 RF, 805 RF, 800. There still is a modest amount of DP340 out there. I like having DP340 in trials because a lot of growers have used it and been really successful with it over the years as a medium, kind of a moderate maturity or earlier maturing variety. Not great fiber quality, but again, a good yield performer and real consistent. So kind of like to have DP340 in there as for comparison purposes. And again, you can see in this particular year, there's some really good looking numbers at some locations, but not all, for the HA195 and the 222. And I can say, just like in a lot of years, if the HA varieties, in our experience, if they don't set fruit well early, then you're not as likely to get the high yield potential. And if you get cut too short on the fall, then you'll lose part of that potential as well. And so, early hits from Ligus or whatever might take out some of the early developing fruit, make that yield differential less, and a short fall would lead to some problems, and I wouldn't expect to see the same differential there either. And here is Westside and Shafter data for 2011, also in the Pima San Joaquin Valley cotton board trials. So I guess part of what I would say as a take-home message on a lot of this is, again, part of the reason why we try to post this information from multiple counties and give you a chance to take a look at it from multiple locations is, I'm not real big necessarily on statewide averages in terms of yield performance. It's kind of nice, I think, if you can have an opportunity up in this area to look at numbers from Los Manos or Mendota or Westside. Maybe that might be a little more relevant to the situation that you have than maybe some of the situations down further south, or something like Tulare County. So again, you can make your own judgments on that type of thing, but I think it's useful. It's unusual in my perspective to see a whole lot of varieties that just do great everywhere. To me, Phytogen 72 in the Acalas and maybe DP340 in the Pimas probably come about as close to the widely adapted, always in the top, 25% in almost any trial that we've done. It'd be great if one was that way and also race 4 fusarium resistant. I haven't seen it yet. So I think the ones that are, if you're making a primary choice on variety based on race 4 fusarium resistance, it's going to take some playing around with those varieties to learn how to get the most out of them, I think. Okay. Again, our intentions, funding and people and situations allowing, that we will continue to be interested and willing to be involved in variety evaluations in Pima, Acala, and non-Acala uplands. I can't assure anything, but I'm pretty sure that we can still get access to locations at Westside. It has to go through our research advisory committee, to get approval. But I think, in general, that's not too much of a trouble at Westside. We've had continuing interest from the standpoint of the seed companies. To me, it's a little bit encouraging that the seed companies who were being really iffy even as little as 2 years ago, on whether they were going to put any kind of California-based efforts into variety development. You're hearing a little bit of noise from them. Delta Pine or Monsanto has some people on the ground and are talking about some efforts in California. Phytogen certainly has made some public statements about their interest in kind of reviving or continuing with testing of some of their materials that they were developing in the Acalas. And so I think that's kind of a good sign. You know, I guess numbers of acres speak, you know, when it comes to the companies and their willingness to dive into this, but I think that's kind of a good sign. You know, one thing I am very disappointed in, and I don't know exactly how this will play out. In my opinion, we had a public breeder, molecular geneticist in Mauricio Ulloa with USDA ARS group at Shafter, who we are now highly likely to lose unless ARS manages to park him at a location where he can continue to do some work that might be of use to the western U.S. There isn't even really any guarantee that he'll still be working at cotton. So that definitely is a loss in that we had somebody that was working on trait development, and he's highly involved in Fusarium race 4 resistance work. So that's not a good sign, but again, the seed companies, I think, here locally are putting more effort into that. We don't really have a take on whether there are going to be future entries in the Acalas and the San Joaquin Valley Cotton Board testing program. We'll just kind of wait and see. Currently, through a variety of mechanisms, the seed companies and the cotton industry, I guess all of you included, you know, have indicated they still want to have some upland variety testing, and so we'll do it, you know, if there's funding and interest and support to do it. PEMA testing seems to be on a pretty sound level in terms of funding and interest going into the future. And again, the seed companies continue to submit entries to us, and it's always hard for us to know whether they're kind of fishing around for Western U.S. information from sort of a declining list of sources of where they can get that information, or whether they actually expand, have an interest in expanding their operations out here. One thing we're committed to doing, it would be great if we could do it with USDA ARS partners, but we're still think we have the capabilities to continue with FOV race 4 screening of both public materials if we can identify them, as well as commercial entries from the seed companies. One thing I'll mention in the public materials is, for better or worse, the race 4 fusarium issue has caught the attention of enough of the people at the level of the breeders that we've been getting entries from pretty much, I think, the breeders in every single cotton producing state in the U.S. In a thing called the RBTN trial that's been going on for a long time as a basic yield evaluation, fiber quality evaluation, but they've asked us to also include fusarium entries in it. So I think that's kind of a good sign, and we are seeing some numbers that you know, look like they might be okay in terms of performance of some of these varieties. I can hand out just briefly in case anybody has any questions about it. I don't think I'll go into a bunch of detail since we talked about it at an earlier meeting. But this is the 2010 screening on the fusarium out at a field site. And after they're passed around, I'll just mention a couple things briefly to you that I think you might want to, you know, take a look at. We'll have the 2011 data posted on the website. I'm hopeful within the next week. We've already kind of gone through it all and kind of done our troubleshooting of the data sets. We have the greenhouse data put together. So again, we'll try to have that posted, I hope, within the next week or so. And again, this is 2010 numbers, and I guess part of what I just wanted to mention, if you go to, let's see, if you take the first page and you look in the middle of the first page, okay, I put a check mark on the two columns that I think are ones that are of most interest. One of them says average root vascular stain rating, and that's for fusarium. root vascular staining is kind of an indicator, a relative indicator of how resistant the variety is, or one of the tools you can use. Okay, and if you go down, and then the other check mark over on the right-hand side of the page is the percent survival at a high-pressure disease site, where we looked at plant responses to fusarium. Okay, if you look at the one that says root vascular stain rating there in the middle, I'll just draw your attention to a couple of numbers. If you look down at the second variety listed, Phytogen 802RF, okay, that's a Pima, and that's commercially available. That was a fairly widely planted variety this year. That's a good number. That's 0.73, something less than a 1, and that root vascular staining number is a good number. It means it's looks quite good at the test location. If you compare that, it just happens to have the same average as for Phytogen 800, which we've known for about 7 or 8 years is a highly resistant variety. And you can take a look over there on the right on both of those, and the percent survival on the 802 is 95%. On the 800, it's about 90%, or about 91. Okay, and for comparison purposes, I'll have you go down to the second one up from the bottom on that same page is Phytogen 72 Acala. So it's our conventional Acala, still widely planted. You look at the root vascular stain number on that one is 2.33, and that's not a good number. Okay, so that means that even though it's an Acala, not a susceptible Pima, I mean, it definitely can get affected. It hung in there pretty well at this location this year, you know, where it says 86% survival. But I guarantee you in some years, under certain circumstances, we've seen Phytogen 72, maybe half of the stand lost, you know, 50%, 40% survival. So, okay, and the reason why I mentioned you might want to go down and look at those particular columns then is if you flip through and look at some of the other pages, I'll have you go to page 3. Okay, and on page 3, again, if you look at that one in the middle, the one that says average root vascular stain rating, there are some experimentals. That entry number 121, the first one listed is from Bayer, BCSX 1010. There's a second one that doesn't look as good. There's a third one, BCSX 1040. And then you can see even ones like the next one. 124 is Phytogen 367 WRF. That's a commercially available variety. Phytogen 375 WRF is a commercially available variety. And both of those look quite good in terms of root vascular staining, in terms of percent plant survival. And so the reason why I wanted to mention this is what we're trying to do right now, and you know, during the month of December and hopefully the first couple of weeks of January, we're going to go through our 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011 screening data on the uplands and Acalas and try to kind of group them into maybe the best third or the best half in terms of survival and vascular stain ratings, and then the worst performing ones. So we haven't really focused on that very much before, and I'll have to just sort of admit that we'd been sort of roughly grouping things into highly susceptible Pimas and pretty good or very good Pimas, and then we were just sort of lumping the uplands as in general and the Acalas into a group that was sort of not as bad as the worst Pimas and not as good as the best Pimas. And so hopefully we'll provide a little more useful information if you're you know, most likely to want to plant an Acala or upland variety. Maybe that'll give a little bit more information on choices. Okay, and that's pretty much what I had. I always hate to end any kind of discussion with discussion of race 4 fusarium because I don't want to get booed out of the room or kicked out of the room. So it's not a fun subject to talk about, but I mean, I do think unfortunately it's also part of your variety choice decision if you're in a situation where the pathogen's present. So.
Are they picking it up outside of California now? Race 4?
You know, there was a report about 4 months ago that they thought they had identified it in, I think it was Alabama or Mississippi, And since that time, they've been kind of iffy on being willing to make that same statement. But just to prove that, you know, nothing stays still, and I mean, that's where I think that, to me, I'm not a pathologist, but to me, the pathologists and the entomologists are all in the same boat. Everything is a moving target. You know, you're gonna get something new that's gonna come in. Just when you think you've got everything all sorted out and figured out, something new will come in and disrupt the whole works. In looking for race 4 fusarium, one of the things that they found is that they have all these nice nifty molecular tools. So whereas you used to say, well, this is sort of this general type of fusarium, you didn't really just get it narrowed right down to something super specific. Now they can nail this stuff down to, you know, identifying things that just have some slight variation that might be important in terms of what they infect or what they don't do. And they've identified some really hairy, nasty looking fusariums down in the south. So in Louisiana and Alabama and Mississippi. And Mike Davis, the pathologist, who's probably quite a few you know from the Davis campus, he does a lot of tomato work down here, a lot of work with cotton and other crops. Mike said that several of those are on I don't think any of them are worse on Pimas than race 4 that they've identified, but a couple of the ones they have down in the south are even worse on Acalas than what we have with race 4. And so, you know, whenever somebody's going to say, well, man, I'm not going to buy anything from California and send it to Alabama anymore, you know, it may be that it works both ways. So it's the more you know, the more things can look kind of spooky. I don't know if you've got any comments on that, Pete, but it's interesting to see it, but just because, like I said, this stuff is all a moving target. And
I had some inquiries from Texas by some colleagues asking for a bunch of information. I think I passed it off to you.
And
is this an education program they were doing, or they actually came across something?
No, they haven't. I don't think anybody has identified it from samples. There have been samples going, you know, back and forth and everything, but you know, as you can imagine, people are, what they'd really like to do is provide the information for the analysis and not have people sending samples in the mail, you know, back and forth across these locations. So, you know, the tools are there in every state. You know, everybody's got resource limitations, but the tools are there to be able to do the identification at, you know, quite a few different spots in the U.S. And I'm not aware of commercial laboratories doing the work. They certainly could, with the tools that have been developed by the University, USDA, and other people. They could set up commercial laboratories to do some of this kind of these analyses. I think the numbers haven't been there, you know, to warrant them offering it as a service yet. So I do know one other thing on the FOB is they are going to have some meetings, I think, in January about the approach that the CCIA, or Crop Improvement Association, is going to take in combination with the seed companies for how they're going to do field inspections. So they're going to kind of ramp everything up to where all of the field inspections on seed fields will be significantly earlier than in the past, and that matches what we've been recommending the last 4 or 5 years. So I think they're looking hard at ways to kind of reduce the potential for seed transmission of the disease. So, okay.
Thank you, Bob.
All right.
Taking the time.
Thank you for the invitation and the lunch.
Of course.